Good day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my office. So before I jump into the next set of videos, I want to do a quick introduction to an area of chemistry that we sometimes call separation science. The goal here is to separate chemicals from one another. Essentially, when we talk about chemistry, we like to talk about pure substances, one thing or maybe two things in a mixture that react to form two others, and we like to think about them as nice, clean things. But, yeah, reality is not that. When has reality ever been clean? So when we are dealing with chemicals, especially when we start out, we've got our initial chemicals, and we might not have to do this. At some point, the chemicals are going to have to be manufactured, and those are going to be manufactured from what we call a feedstock. A feedstock is the raw material for which our chemicals are going to be created from. Now, it depends on what chemical you have as to what the feedstock is, and we do change the feedstocks over time, depending on what makes the most economic sense. So for most organic molecules, we're going to see feedstocks today that are typically petroleum products. It's a large source of carbon-rich molecules that are nice and simple that we can build together and make new, more complicated, and more interesting carbon-rich molecules. Ethene, C2H4, is one of the top chemical feedstocks, especially for the polymer industry. And that, of course, typically comes from oil wells. It's a petrochemical. Now, of course, that's not the only feedstock. We use lots of botanical products today. As a feedstock, there's a big push to increase the amount of plant-derived feedstocks for a couple reasons. One, they tend to be somewhat more sustainable than a petroleum-based one. Also, they're not going to be as susceptible to the price swings of oil, which is notoriously up and downy as far as price goes. And of course, if your starting material goes up in price and you didn't have that big of a margin, that can actually make a pretty big difference to your bottom line. Starting materials for the plant-derived ones, soybeans are, of course, a classic. The soybean lobby is actually pretty good. I remember when I was a young chemist, still in college, was at an American Chemical Society meeting, and I'm touring all the vendors, seeing the gigantic beakers and all the fun stuff. Which, if you're ever at an American Chemical Society meeting, tour the vendors. They got cool stuff. But one of the things that there was a vendor there who wasn't selling anything, he was actually giving away grants, and he's like, hey, we're the American Soybean Farmers Association or something like that. And what we want to do is sell more soybeans, so we'll give you money if you discover ways to use soybeans so we can sell more soybeans. And hey, they've been pushing for that for a while. That's actually where George Washington Carver became George Washington Carver. His work was really trying to find economically viable uses for soybeans, peanuts, and sweet potatoes, which were all crops grown in the American South that were important parts of the crop rotation cycle for nitrogen fixation and soil improvement. But at that time, at the turn of the 20th century, late 19th century, would have resulted in a very severe economic loss to the farmer. They would grow their, cotton or corn or whatever their cash crop was, but if you were doing crop rotation, that meant the next year you got next to nothing. So he's working on finding sources so that those crops would have value also, which of course, has been successful. Soybeans are a major, major crop in the United States. So more people have continued that work. But yeah, so we could have used that. Before oil became big, coal tar was the major feedstock. That's a waste product from the illuminating gas manufacturing. Illuminating gas is made from coal that's been roasted, and one of the byproducts is this toxic, disgusting sludge called coal tar. And a lot of modern chemistry really evolved from, okay, we've got this disgusting stuff. Can we do anything with it? The answer was yes. Yes, we can. We can do wonderful stuff with this. And of course, plant derives have gone back since antiquity. Rocks, other minerals, there's lots of feedstocks. But these feedstocks come out as a dirty mess. Those plants are not making chemicals for you, they're making chemicals for them. So they got a whole bunch of stuff. Oil is, if you look at crude oil, that stuff's disgusting. All kinds of various organic molecules in there. So you got to separate them out. Additionally, even if you have pure chemicals and you do a chemical reaction, the chemical reactions don't just go to completion usually. You're going to have reactants left over, sometimes what we call starting materials. You're going to have, of course, your product, but you may have multiple products that you have to clean out. And you can have side products, things that you didn't really want to make, but the chemicals decided to make anyways. And so you're going to have to separate that mixture too and purify the thing that you want. And so separation science really starts getting in this idea of, okay, how do we separate the chemicals out so that we can either purify the one we want or we can figure out if it's there. So, you know, if you're going to test for a chemical, the first thing you got to do is get it by itself, or at least close enough to by itself so that you can figure out what it is. You have to get it away from all the other junk. The other junk, by the way, we call the matrix. And thus you have to separate it from its matrix in order to figure out, well, do you have it and how much? So in following videos, I'm going to look at ways we can separate our chemicals apart and thus, you know, get the nice stuff that we want.